So what's the difference between a color correction and the color grade? Let's get into it. I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, you're getting into color grading or you're someone that's interested in filmmaking. Now, one thing that I see getting confused a lot, mainly on Instagram, not so much on YouTube, but on Instagram and TikTok, I see color correction and color grading confused quite often. So today we're gonna talk about those two things. I'm gonna do a color correction on a clip and I'm gonna do a color grade on a clip, and you guys can watch me do that so you guys can see the difference from both a theory example of me chatting and an actual practical example of me doing it in front of you. So theory time, what is color correction? Color correction is actually the process of getting your clip ready to color grade. That means you've got your log footage, you're going to convert it to Rec 709 or whatever color space you are going for that grade, and then you're going to correct the contrast, the saturation, the color balance, and basically get it in a spot where it's acceptable to look at, but you haven't actually done anything stylistic or anything sort of artistic with the footage. So it's just taking it from a raw file that comes out of the camera into something that's like quite clean, almost like commercial-like, and just a good image. That is color correction. So when you think about it, it's almost in the name. You're just taking it from a log flat profile, correcting it so it is a nice, even starting point to start your grade. And that is the point of the color correction. It gets you ready to grade. Sometimes clips only need color correction, depending on your client, what they want. And then comes color grading, which is where you do your more artistic, stylistic stuff. That's where you sort of create mood. This is where you play with colors. This is where you move things around to sort of direct the audience's eyes through color. Your color correction is always in the process. It's one of the most important things. You've done it a million times, whether you know it or not, and that's just changing the balance, changing the contrast and all that. Color grades is the more complicated building on top of that foundation where you actually change the colors and create an artistic style. So that's all well and good in theory, but can we see a practical example? Yes, you can. Let's jump into DaVinci Resolve. We'll go through a clip and I'll show you how I color corrected it and how I color graded it. How I color graded it. Got there eventually. Here we are with a node tree already set up. It might look a bit confusing if you're new to DaVinci Resolve or you're new to color grading, but this is my sort of standard tree. I work off this, but I don't always use the nodes, all the nodes in here. But to break it down, guys, we'll go through a color correction first. So I've got my log footage here. It was shot with the Sony a7S III. First thing I want to do when I'm doing my color correction is I'm going to do a color space transform on this node. Yes, you can do it in the color space management tab, but just for the sake of this tutorial, guys, input was slog cine, slog 3. I'm going to go rec and rec 709. So straight off the bat, when we're correcting this clip, you can see it is drastically underexposed. So I'm going to come over to my primary wheels here, and I'm going to drag that offset up until it's sort of where we want it. So that was pretty underexposed. And now it's about playing with the lift gamma gain to the point where I think it's in a good position. So I like to use HDR wheels just because it's a log footage so you can see where it's at, and that's where the dark is. So we can drag that down a little bit. Lift the shadows up a little bit just to pop him out, but get that good contrast in that area. Lights, I don't know if we really need. I'll drag them down a little bit. And your highlights and saturation, if we come back over to our primary wheels, and then we're going to add in, I usually go for a 75. And then your balance is your color balance, which I'm actually pretty happy with. Looks like I balanced it pretty well. So this is the color corrected clip. This is not color grade, this is a color correction. I've taken it from this and brought it up to this. I've added saturation, played around with the lift gamma gain, or your shadows, your highlights, and your midtones. And now basically is where I need it to be to start my grade. As I said before, your color grade is always built off your color correction. So I'm going to come into this little 3 nodes here. These are my parallel nodes, which means basically they will work off the correction but work individual of each other and then feed in down the line for my look. So one thing that this client asked for was steely blue skies because they want a bit of a moodier look and a little bit muted. So what I will do is come over to my hue luminance, get my sky, grab those blues and just sort of drag them down a little bit. I think even what we might do is grab the saturation of the blues, drag them down a little bit. And at this point we can start looking towards the greens and taking their saturation out as well. And luckily, because we don't have any people in here, I can start taking out the saturation for the yellows as well, because usually your grass usually sits in the yellowy green sort of area, so a little bit more muted there. If we go hue versus hue, I might actually take these yellows. Let's see what we can do. I'm loving that. Leave them alone. That's the thing about color grading, is you always just got to play around and have fun with it. Getting as much out of that as I would like. Oh yeah, there we go. I need to play around. Looks like I need to play around a little bit more in the teal space than the blue space. What I'm actually going to come down to is another thing of HDR wheels, and just look at my lights. I think it was my lights. I'm just going to a little bit of blue. See if I can just play around with that. Even more blue. And I'm going to play with this slider until I can get it in a spot where I'm not affecting the clouds too much. I don't want any color cast in the clouds. But I'm also putting a fair bit of color into those other spots. So that's looking pretty good. Look at our highlights. Drag them down a little bit as well. I'm starting in that steely blue sky coming through while not affecting the clouds too much. And the last little one I'm going to do while I'm playing around here is just make sure I haven't put any colors into the shadows. Just drag out any of that and into your whites, just so I'm making sure that I'm not stuffing around with the whites or the highlights too much. So this is almost done. There's just a few other things I can do. Always like to do a power window. Take that softness all the way up, drag it down, put it around your subject, get them popping with a tiny bit of contrast. Like so, and then we go into the opposite selection. I'm just going to drag that down a little bit. And then, even though we've done our color correction before, once we've done our grade, it's always prudent to come back and play around with things a little bit. I've probably brought the shadows down a bit too much, seeing as I was adding in contrast. And then we can probably go to our darks and lift them up a bit too. There you go. Finally got it to a point where I wanted, obviously a very muted look, very dramatic, but that is what the client wanted when they did do their original color grade. So yeah, that's what you have. When you have a color corrected clip, it's something like this. And when you have a color graded clip, it's something like this. I hope that cleared things up, guys. I really appreciate your time. I hope this was valuable to you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.